Hey, there it
Hey,
is.
there we are.
Nice.
Nice. Sorry about being a
Live
few
on,
minutes late.
yeah, live on YouTube after much hue and cry on our side. It was not as easy as you might think, but we are here and excited to bring you the first live stream of the Bear era, if that's a thing. We'll be talking about the head coaching search. We will be celebrating some of the good things that happened this season. We will be talking about some of the bad things that happened this season too. But before we dive into all of that, Ciaran, how are you?
I am doing good. It is going to be an interesting couple of weeks. It is nice to be on the rear view mirror of a disappointing Bear season, but there's a lot of intrigue with this team moving forward. There's a lot of big decisions that have to be made, and it is great to be able to talk about them.
I don't know if it's great. We will be talking about them. The coaching search is certainly going to dominate this session. That's what most fans are interested in and feels like kind of the crux move for the Chicago Bears moving forward. And early returns, we'll just say this, are not good. But I want to thank everybody who's joining us and hanging out and everybody who joined us throughout the season. We would not have been able to do this without you. It was a new idea that came up right about the beginning of the season. We got live about a quarter of the way into the season, and we are at 800, almost 50 subscribers. We are pushing towards 1,000, which will allow us to do some more things on YouTube. And we have all of you to thank for all of that. So we very much appreciate it. Before we dive into the less exciting stuff, or equally exciting, but less, let's just say less good stuff, because early returns on the coaching search are not great. So the Bears have a list of over 20 candidates that they're interviewing. And I don't know about you, Ciaran, but have you ever interviewed for a job somewhere and you took the interview and you walked out and you said, I don't care if they offer me the job or not. I would never work at that place ever. That's the vibe the Bears are giving off right now, is that it is not organized and that they do not have a direction, or at least not a unified direction. Nobody's really clear about who is running or driving the search. And as a result, they're just doing this cast the nets wide thing. And honestly, when you see anybody, any business doing that, kind of taking all comers, they don't know what they want, right? If you are aware of what you want and you're focused in your search, you probably bring in 6, maybe 8 candidates. A couple of them are favors to agents, not real issues. And you really want to talk to 4 to 6, coaches and see if they're the guy to lead your franchise. If you're taking 20, you just don't know what you want. And the rest of the league is taking notice. Agents are taking notice. I'm at a place now where people say things to me, good things and bad things. Some of them are, again, involved in the agent side. Some of them know the coaches that are involved. Some of them are just in the league in other capacities. People are saying one or two things to me right now. What the hell are the Bears doing, for the folks that are not engaged in this search in any particular capacity directly? And for the few folks that I've talked to that have been engaged directly or are engaged with folks who have been, is, yeah, they don't know what they're doing. Like, they don't know what they want and they don't know what they're doing. And those are two things you don't want to hear about your favorite team. But I think it's pretty obvious from the outside. That doesn't feel like insider information to me. When we watch how the Bears have approached this search from the outside, I think it's pretty clear that the Bears are not super focused and they don't really know what they want.
Yeah, from talking to enough people around the team, around kind of that also follow other teams that are also in the midst of a coaching search, a big thing has been who's actually in control of it. And it's an important element because these coaches that are coming in, they want to know really who's in charge.
Yeah.
Like, is it Ryan Poles? Is it Kevin Warren? Like, you hear from some people and they'll say certain candidates are the ones that Ryan Poles wants to interview. And then you hear from others that it's that Kevin Warren wants to bring certain guys in. And that's never a good approach. You need to have kind of a collaborative effort of where you agree on certain candidates. So my big concern is, and we can spitball like kind of some of the kind of names that people have been talking about in terms of Ben Johnson, Mike McCarthy, Todd Monken, all those guys. My worry is what happens if Ryan Poles is sold on Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson wants to come to the Bears, but what happens if Kevin Warren's not sold on Ben Johnson and he's sold on, I don't know, Pete Carroll or Mike McCarthy? Who gets the decision then? Who gets to make that choice? And that's the risk that you run when you have multiple people being involved in this and you not giving the onus of the GM to make this decision. Or he may, but the perception is that he doesn't have the full autonomy to make this decision. And even if that's not true, around the league, perception is reality. And that's the way it comes across. And that's the way people are talking about it in the league, is the way kind of the reporters from that cover the Bears are talking about it. And it's a tough situation as a fan, because it's hard to trust them to that they'll make the right decision. And I think that's a big thing. Maybe they'll prove us all wrong, and maybe they'll make the right decision, and we can sit here in a year's time being like, they made a good decision. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt in future. But right now, they don't deserve that.
They do not. And it feels to me like if the Bears win in this particular coaching search, and that is get a coach that leads them to major improvement and to being a team that is, difficult to play on a week-to-week basis in the NFL, they're going to do it because they got lucky, not because they were good. They didn't go about it the right way. The process didn't really support the results. But hey, every once in a while, we've all seen it. Just, playing football in the park on Sunday, you're getting tackled, you throw one up, somebody catches it, the defender slips, and there it is. It's touchdown. Was it a great plan? No. Was it well executed? Absolutely not. Did it still score? It does. And we've seen teams do this in the past. We've seen them get lucky with, a candidate that everybody said they were settling for or something else. And it worked out. It clicked. And if anything, I think Nick Wright said it, you can turn a franchise around very, very quickly if you get the head coach quarterback combination correct. You can spackle over a lot of cracks in an organization if you get those two choices right. Now, we do believe in Caleb. We think he's a good quarterback. We definitely think he needs some leadership, and not from a, being a leader on the team sort of standpoint, but more from an offensive standpoint in terms of, here's the plan. Here's what we need you to execute. We're not just relying on you to quote unquote go out and be a playmaker. We're going to give you a solid plan that puts you in a good position to succeed. He needs that kind of leadership from a coach. If the Bears happen to get that right, if they land a guy like Todd Monken or say Joe Brady, who have proven that they can work with the pieces they have very, very well and coordinate offenses that threaten defenses on a weekly basis, the Bears could look pretty good next year. There are lots of other factors that play into that. In fact, most of the top offensive guys that we're talking about this year had very good offensive line play. Liam Cohen in Tampa Bay had a top 10 offensive line. Ben Johnson obviously had a top 10 offensive line with the Detroit Lions. Joe Brady has a very good offensive line with the Bills. They all have good quarterbacks as well, but they all have great offensive line play. The Bears need to nail the offensive line. You know that if you listen to this podcast. We have been hammering on that drum since the beginning. They still need to do that in addition. But if you get those two choices right, now we think they got the quarterback right. We hope they get the coach right. But boy, it just seems like they are taking an approach that is more flailing than focused. And that is a tough way to try and win in the NFL. And candidates see it too. Candidates are going to multiple teams. It's not like they're going to one team and making a decision, am I going to coach here or not? And then sort of sequentially going to the next team. They're going to 3 or 4 interviews before they make a decision. They're seeing all these franchises represent themselves in the interview process, in the questions they get asked and who they get to see and how the power structure is actually laid out, kind of things you're going to find out in an interview or head coaching interview for sure. So they can compare and contrast on their own. They don't need to take anybody's opinion or word for it. It's like, well, this was, top to bottom, the best organization I visited, or wow, this organization could not get out of its own way. I'm pretty sure I don't want to work there, because that's what it's going to be like every week. So for as much as we might try and compare them from the outside, the candidates are doing just that from the inside. And if you go somewhere and they roll out the red carpet and they are incredibly organized and say, you are going to have what you think you need to win. And then you go to another organization and they can't shoot straight. It's going to be a very clear decision for you as a head coach, thinking about where your best chance to succeed in a very competitive league is. And right now, from basically the reports that I've heard, the Bears are not representing themselves particularly well. Could they still get lucky and pick the right coach? They could. Is that a good thing to rely on? Not typically.
Yeah, and that's the worry kind of moving forward. And like, I worry when I hear the reports of how they're conducting the interview process now. Look, it's one thing to kind of talk about kind of what the reporters are saying, because at the end of the day, they're probably getting snippets of what's happening. These interviews are lasting hours. They're going to have multiple. They've, as we know, they've only done one in person with Ron Rivera, and then Mike McCarthy's is tomorrow, again in person. We don't really know what's happening within the length of those interviews. There could be loads, but what I don't particularly like is you're hearing of where the candidates are meeting with all these guys on a Zoom, and then suddenly they have an individual meeting with Ryan Poles, an individual meeting with George McCaskey, an individual meeting with Kevin Warren, and those things are not conducive to being a productive interview overall. Like, you want to be able to show like what's the importance. I don't mind if they want to do a group Zoom and then they meet with Ryan Poles. So I think that's what's going to be important, that when they're meeting with these candidates, especially in person, that they're doing it in the right way, because these candidates are the same for pretty much every single job. Like, Ben Johnson has interviewed with pretty much every single job except for the Jets. If you want to talk about Todd Monken, he's probably going to interview for all these jobs. I know he can start interviewing, what was it, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week, and then he's back into getting ready for the playoffs. It's probably more likely that he will only interview on maybe Wednesday and potentially early Thursday. Could you imagine the Ravens would want him being solely focused on the playoff game once they hit Friday? But it's the same thing for if you are interested in Mike McCarthy. He'll be meeting with the Saints. If he sees a big difference between what the Bears are doing in terms of how they're portraying themselves versus these other organizations, that becomes a worry, because then these candidates are going to make the best decisions for themselves. Like, for any fan that is very interested in Ben Johnson realizes that this is going to be probably his one shot to be a head coach, because typically you get one shot and that's it, unless you are successful. If he goes to the Bears and it's as dysfunctional as it has been, and he loses his job after 3 years, it's very difficult for him to come back from that. Same thing for, and kind of a reason why I don't really believe too much to do with the Raiders, because that organization in the last, 20 to 25 years has had 15 head coaches. Like, it's another one where I don't typically believe a lot of the rumors, and might be a bit more agent led than anything else. But one thing that you mentioned is very, very important for all of these offensive guys. And I kind of want to bring it to the performance of the team and how you actually improve Caleb Williams. We talk about the offensive line all the time, and I think there's a key thing that people focus on: pass protection, which obviously needs to improve. But we spoke about it throughout our podcast, throughout the year. The key on why Caleb Williams was attacked so much and sacked so much is there was no presence of an actual functional running attack. Like, if you can't rush, it doesn't matter, right? Like, you look at Ben Johnson in Detroit, having a David Montgomery there, having Jahmyr Gibbs. You look at what Derrick Henry's been able to do. You look at James Cook in Buffalo as well. Like, all these teams, while they have good weapons, they have good pass protection, the basis of a lot of these offenses is you got to be able to run the football. The Bears couldn't do that. And the one thing that I will say is, if you do get a Ben Johnson or a Todd Monken, free agency is going to be very interesting, because some of those offensive linemen that are currently on their teams are due to be free agents this year. So you have guys, and not all of them are going to be highly priced free agents. They're going to be guys that might be more veteran type guys that they could potentially bring in that will know the system that they're going to play, and you can start to slowly build this offensive line. But honestly, for me, the key is going to be you need to get the running game working because it doesn't work right now. Do you have to cut ties with a DeAndre Swift? If you do, you then do it because you need to find a rushing attack that will actually work. Like you look at what the Ravens were able to do, like bringing in Derrick Henry. People were like, him and Lamar, how's it going to work? And it worked perfectly. You look at what the Bills have done, and this is why I like kind of Joe Brady as well, is that team got decimated because of the salary cap, and they still look good. Like you had multiple players leaving on their offensive line. They still are able to replace them and still look good. You look at the Baltimore Ravens, who seem to lose offensive linemen almost on a yearly basis. I think last year or the year before, they lost Ben Powers. They brought in more guys that can play a position. And that's what you want to be able to do. Get the specific offensive linemen that suit your system, but also you can trust them. Like, stop getting guys that can't pass protect or win at the line of scrimmage in the rushing attack. Like last year, the pass protection wasn't very good, right? Even with Justin. But the one thing that they were able to do was run the football, and you've got a bit of push on the inside. That was not happening this year. Like, to a point, I'm not a big fan of DeAndre Swift, but also I can clearly see that when he's trying to run the ball, like he's having two guys in his face before he even hits the line of scrimmage. Like, these are the issues that have to get fixed. Like, they just need, like, forget just trying to add all these like superstar players that people are going to look for when they look at these names in free agency. Get guys that are going to be reliable on the offensive line, at the very least can help you in the running game. If that is the case, I think you'll see Caleb Williams improve. You'll see those sack totals come down, because if you can't run the ball, your offense is dead in the first place. And that's something that does need to get fixed. And I think it's no surprise when you look at what we're seeing from like Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix to a certain point, that there is a cognitive effort to get the running game going and take a little bit of pressure off the quarterback. And then when they have to make a play, they'll make a play. And that's what I want to see them, the Bears, whoever the head coach is that comes in here, puts an emphasis on the running game, because you do that, you make things easier for Caleb. And then you can let Caleb be Caleb and be that kind of Superman when it needs to be.
Yeah. Two things based on what you said. First, any idea who had the fewest pass attempts as an offense in the NFL this year?
The fewest.
I'll give you a clue. It's not who you think.
Really?
Really?
It's not nah, it wouldn't be Green Bay, would it?
No, but it's the team that played them last weekend.
Oh.
Philadelphia had the fewest pass attempts in the league this year. And again, you got a great offensive line. You got Saquon. You're getting production that way. You don't need to put the ball in harm's way, even with a great receiving core. AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Goddard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback throwing outside the numbers. I know a lot of people have issue with Hurts as a quarterback. I think he's good, but if you don't need to, why would you? And Kellen Moore, again, looks at what he's got in his offensive line and Saquon and says, we can win this way. They are, marching towards the top spot in the NFC as the team that threw the ball the least. The other thing you said about Joe Brady is a lot of people have the misconception that the Bills, are a pass heavy team. They have all these pass catchers that you can name. And a lot of people weren't super high on James Cook. Ever since Brady took over, he's been reemphasizing the run. He did it more at the end of last season after he took over midseason. And everybody figured, oh, okay, so that's where he's going to sit with the balance, right? He's running more than his predecessor, Ken Dorsey did, and that's good. Well, no, he kept going at the beginning of this year. He cranked it up. At one point, they were almost 60% run, and they run 6 offensive linemen more than any team in the league, even more than Detroit, who does it a lot. Fun fact. Guess who? This is going to be a fun one for Bears fans. Guess who the offensive line coach is for the Buffalo Bills? Folks that have been fans of the Bears for a while will remember this name, and not necessarily in a positive light, but they probably should because it wasn't his fault. Aaron Cromer.
I actually knew that because I looked at because I was looking at Joe Brady and who was on what staffs he was on.
That's
and I
right.
remember looking at it, I'm like, oh, that's a blast from the past.
Right. I was at Offensive Line Masterminds in Dallas this summer, and that place is who's who. It's Hall of Famers, it's current NFL linemen, it's all the linemen you're going to know the name of in a few years in college. There's 200 plus offensive linemen and offensive line coaches there, plus some media. Was lucky enough to get the invite and walking around, and I turn around and who's there but Aaron Cromer, and he's in his Bills blue. Went up and talked to him for a minute. Super nice guy. Definitely didn't have a great ending in Chicago, but again, I don't believe that was for the most part his mess. Immediately got another job in the NFL. It's kind of low profile. He's worked his way back up, and now he is the offensive line coach for what is arguably one of the top 5 offensive lines in the league on a team that is pushing for the top spot in the AFC. So could a guy like that end up back in Chicago if Joe Brady ends up being the head coach? The answer is yeah, he could. We'll see. He seems very happy, by the way, being an offensive line coach. He didn't seem to have any aspirations about pushing higher up the ladder. He's very satisfied with the guys, very satisfied with the job that Joe is doing and the role that he gets to play there in Buffalo. So it was really interesting to talk to him. But having a rushing game for a young quarterback is really important, but it really goes back to having an offensive line. You talk about pass protection versus run game. Like, it's both. You need a good, solid offensive line, especially for a young quarterback, because they can't be running for their lives all the time. It's not going to work out very well. And the Bears have to get that right. I really thought they would get it right under Ryan Poles himself, being a former offensive lineman. Obviously understands the importance of the position, but hasn't necessarily gone about it the right way. His free agency moves have not panned out in the way certainly that he would have hoped, I think, but certainly not the way the Bears fans hope. And if they don't get that right, this is all kind of for naught. You can bring in the smartest offensive guy in the room. If you can't pass protect or run the ball, it doesn't really matter what his plans look like on paper. On the field, you can't get it done because you don't have an offensive line. Now, there's a lot of options for the Bears. They have extra draft picks this year. They do have money for free agency, but they do have to make the right choices. There's no two ways about it because they have a lot of needs. It's not like they need to get one thing right. It's a lot of teams in the NFL. Look, our right guard sucks. We got to replace our right guard. And if we get that done, that's awesome. The Bears are looking at potentially replacing the entire interior. They might run with Coleman Shelton again if they get 2 new guards. They need another tackle, whether it's a starter or a third tackle. It's pretty clear they don't have that player on their roster right now. I'm not writing off Ciaran Amagaji, but he looked abysmal in his first start. So he's got ways to go. There's a lot of needs here. It's 4 or 5 guys if you're trying to injury proof the offensive line. That's a lot to replace in one season. And yes, you can spread it between draft picks and free agency capital, but you can't be wrong. It's not like you can go out and buy 20 guys in free agency. You don't have that kind of money. And you need to get 3 or 4 in free agency, a couple of top ones, a couple of mid to lower ones who, like you said, might not be the flashiest, but are going to be very solid if they're called into duty. And then you're going to have to spend some high draft picks on investing in the offensive line. You've got to start to build a young core in front of Caleb. And if you don't, you're in deep trouble, and sort of the woes will continue. Beatings will continue until the offensive line improves. That's kind of the way this is going to go. So probably time to take some questions. What do we got going on? By the way, big thanks to Mike Mercado. He is hanging out in the background, running the chat for us. You see him as Bear Era, our good old super producer that does Mike on the mic every week for us, is supporting us on the back end, which is pretty cool. Happy we ended with this win, especially over Green Bay. Wesley, me too. It feels good to win as a football team. It feels doubly good to beat Green Bay. I think a lot of things that people said about Green Bay some of them were validated in their loss to the Eagles. I think a lot of what was made about Jordan Love's play was sort of overblown in some areas, but also sort of overlooked in other areas. Some of those things came back to bite them. But what really sunk Green Bay is not the coaching, is not the players. It was injuries. It was attrition. They were down to wide receiver 3 being their wide receiver 1. and wide receiver 4 was also out. So he was apparently like wide receiver 3, 4, and 5 for them. You can't win that way. They lost a couple of key offensive linemen as well in the week before and in that game. The losses just mounted to a point where if you're playing a very good team like the Philadelphia Eagles, you just didn't have the horses anymore. There weren't enough guys left on the field. It's not that Green Bay is a bad team. They're a very good team. Jordan Love, I think, was a little bit overblown in terms of, he's automatically a top 10 quarterback. He can play like a top 10 quarterback, but he can also play like a, bottom 10 quarterback or a 20th best quarterback, and it can be play to play. He doesn't have the consistency yet where he is consistently a top 10 starter. Now, Green Bay is the youngest offense in the NFL by age for the second year running. So they got a really good young core. They got a lot of players there who are going to continue to develop for them. It's very cheap for them as well because they have so many young players who've stepped up on that offense. So Green Bay is in a decent situation to be good again next year. I think they need to be realistic about what they have and what they don't, but it's not that they're not going to be a good team. If you're looking for a regression candidate in the NFC North, it's Minnesota because they're going to be starting JJ McCarthy, who I think will be pretty good, but is still going to be a rookie for, all things considered. And they're losing 37 players in free agency, I think, which is, not atypical. Turnover in free agency is a lot. There's not a lot of high-end starters on that list. There's maybe 4 or 5 guys who contribute on that list, and they can probably re-sign 2 or 3 of them. But everybody's like, well, great. They'll just, refill with all the draft picks they have.
Nope.
They have 3 draft picks right now. They have a 1, which they were very proud about keeping. We got McCarthy and we kept our 1. Good for you. And they have 2 5s. So
not great, Bob.
They're gonna be tough. They only have 3 draft picks. They have more needs than they have draft picks by far. And they're going to make a change at quarterback from Darnold, who was very good for most of the year. Yes, he lagged off in the last 2 weeks. To McCarthy, who they're very excited about and has a ton of promise, but is still a rookie, has not played any NFL games that matter. So if you're looking for somebody to take a step back, again, 14 wins is a tough sort of standard to maintain at any given rate with all those changes. If you're looking for somebody to take a step down and wins in the NFC North next year, Vikings would be a pretty good bet.
Yeah, and I think that's an obvious one. You have some guys that are in, especially offensively, that are going to be going. Obviously, Aaron Jones only signed a 1-year deal with the Minnesota Vikings. You'd imagine they would want him to come back, but if another team offers him more money, he could be gone. And you look at some of the cap space around the league this year, it's very, very high. I know I kind of did a little project to kind of look at, obviously, different teams are saying we have a boatload of capital and that we can use and loads of cap space. And then I go and look at it and there's like 12 teams that have at least 40 million or above. So like there's going to be space to go around, and that's going to be tough when you have 37 free agents. You only have 3 draft picks, and it's not like your first round pick is a high first round pick. You made the playoffs. So there's really not that much that you're going to be able to do. You're kind of banking on maybe a team trying to jump back into the first round to accumulate some draft capital there, because if you make that pick in the first round, well, you're going to be sitting around for a while before you can make another selection. And that's going to be tough. So yeah, I agree with you. I think Minnesota is likely the team to fall back. You mentioned JJ McCarthy. Not only is he young to essentially have his rookie season, but he's coming off a serious injury, which you have to...
not as serious. That's one of the things about McCarthy that got overblown, is he had 2 surgeries, but the second surgery was exploratory and not repaired. So like, I think they sat him once they saw that they had Sam playing well and KOC felt comfortable. He was like, great, I'm just going to make sure that this guy that we just invested a very high draft pick in and a bunch of money is fully healthy and doesn't have to get thrown out there to the wolves. And then look, it was a very easy decision because they started rolling, and it's easy when you're winning in the NFL. They just said, hey, this is the safe way to go, but no safety blanket next year. Sam is almost assuredly going to sign somewhere else. You are starting McCarthy, and as he goes, so goes the Vikings. That's a tough spot for a guy that has not played meaningful NFL games to be in.
There's a lot of, and the unfortunate thing for him is if he didn't get hurt, you wonder what would have the expectations been this year. Now you have a team that you're taking over and just went 14-2, and you're trying to figure out, like, let's say they start off the season with a losing streak of, like, let's say they go 0-3. Well, then suddenly all the people are going to be talking about, well, they only lost 2 games last year with Darnold. Was it a mistake to let him go and keep, or I know they're going to keep JJ, but like, it's an interesting storyline that's going to go throughout the NFL next year. And look, I think that depending on what they're able to do in terms of keeping some of their guys that are impending free agents, that's kind of where you're going to see this Vikings team. I think we kind of spoke about it in our Vikings episode this year. It's a team that were overperforming, really, because they had some good games. They never looked like that team that you were like, this could be a genuine Super Bowl winning team. Because normally when you're talking about a team that wins 14 games, you're like, this team should be one of the favorites to make the Super Bowl. And I don't think there was a lot of people going into the playoffs that felt that way. Like, when you look at, it was them versus Detroit in the last game of the year to see who would get the number 1 seed. I think people feel a lot differently about that Detroit team versus the Vikings team. And then when you look at Detroit, and they've also been decimated with injuries as well. So that's going to be an interesting storyline this coming weekend against Washington, because how will that affect you? Because we've seen teams that have looked good in the regular season, and it's just a different animal in the playoffs. Like, these defenses lock in the playoffs. You're seeing the teams that have kind of those ferocious pass rushers, good coverage. They're the ones that are really kind of coming to the forefront here and playing really good football. And it's no surprise. It always happens in the playoffs. It kind of takes, if you can get through the divisional game as well and the wild card weekend with your offense being okay, but your defense keeping you in it, the offense slowly adjusts to kind of these kind of more stringent defenses moving ahead in the playoffs, and you start to see more higher scoring games as we go along. To go to the other point of Green Bay, I agree with you. Having a young team, really good. I think their problem is, and you mentioned it, they're inconsistent. Like, you look at Jordan Love, and sometimes you look at him and he looks very composed. He looks assured of what he's supposed to do. And then once there's a bit of chaos in there, his footwork goes to crap. And that's when he airmails some of those footballs. Like, he had the ball intercepted 3 times, and I looked at that game and it could have been 5. And that is the problem. And look, to a point, we wanted more in terms of some of the deep balls from Caleb this year, but what he learned is actually very important. You need to take care of the football if you want to win these football games, and you can kind of build on that. I don't think within the offense of Green Bay, Jordan Love has learned that skill yet, because it's always going for the winning ball, right? He's always trying to be the hero, and he doesn't actually need to do that, because you look at when he was injured and what they were able to do with their backup coming in. He's just playing within the offense, and it looked fine. If Jordan Love can do that a little bit more, trust the guys around him, and not just constantly try and get the Superman ball all the time that we talk about with Caleb Williams at times, I think you'll see his interception rate go down. You'll see some of those passes that just look like, don't know what you were looking at there. That'll start to come down. And look, as a Bears fan, I don't care. I hope it doesn't. But as someone who likes to analyze the NFL, likes to look at what these quarterbacks and what these young quarterbacks are doing, because as a fan of the league, and when we look at the playoffs, we want the quarterbacks that are in there to be the best of the best. You want the guys that are able to perform at the highest stage. And for Jordan Love, it's a big thing. It's the inconsistency. It's not. I've seen so many Packers fans complaining about the coach. It's not the coach. Your coach is good. Your coach knows how to scheme offense. He did it last year, and he made Jordan Love $55 million a year. And that is what I will say. And I've seen a lot of people say for these losing teams, fire the coach. You've just made the playoffs. Calm down. Like, it's like, it's a lot worse out there. But yeah, I think the division is going to be very interesting because you have the Lions, who look, they could be a Super Bowl contender this year, but they're very much going to lose their offensive and defensive coordinator to head coaching jobs. And how do they replace those guys? Because look, Dan Campbell is a very good head coach, but he's not like a maestro tactician. He's not going to be like the kind of guy that's going to run the offense or run the defense. He needs to hire guys that will be able to do that when he does lose those coordinators. You would have confidence in him to be able to do that because, well, he put together a really good staff in the first place. So you would expect that he could do that again. But again, it's not always easy to be able to consistently replace good coaches. And we'll see what happens there. But they have an excellent team and to a point, a quite young team as well. You mentioned the Minnesota Vikings and also the Green Bay Packers. And the question just comes to, will the Bears get the coaching hire right? Because if they do, and they start to build on the two lines, they can be competitive in the division. They've shown it when they went head-to-head against the teams. Really, it was only that second Lions game and the kind of, to a point, the second Vikings game where the Bears just didn't look like they belonged in those games. But every other one, like we talk about that Green Bay game and Caleb Williams putting them in position to win, they should have beat Green Bay twice this year. It should have happened. And where I'm happy with what happened at the end of the year is Caleb getting his flowers for something that should have happened earlier in the year, where he brought them back in, I think I could count 5 games with last minute drives, and the Bears found ways to lose those games when they really should have won. And if they did win even half of those, I think we talk about Caleb in a way more positive light of, he has something that we didn't have before in some of our quarterbacks, that kind of clutch gene at the end of a game. If you have the ball with 90 seconds left, he can get you in a position to win a football game. We saw that as him as a rookie, even with all the chaos. And if you can get the coaching right, if you can get some of the support system around him correct, you could really see this team outperform maybe some of the expectations that are going to be on this team, because they're going to be lower than what they were this year after seeing what happened.
Yeah.
But I trust what I saw with my eyes with Caleb. If the Bears get, let's just say, an adequate coaching staff around him, I think you can see definitely a major uptick in the performance level of Caleb. And that, if you can do that, the Bears will be competitive within the division. Will they win it? No. Can they compete to try and get close to being in the playoffs? There's an argument to put that forward. But again, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made before you can actually say that, because we don't know who they're going to hire as the head coach. And even with that, they could hire Ben Johnson, but then if he doesn't hire the right staff around him, it's still probably not going to matter.
No, it won't matter. You're correct about that. And, there are reasons for hope with Caleb that are, beyond some of the micro stuff from this season. If you look at number 1 picks overall, quarterback, since the modern draft era started, Caleb Williams is number 1 in touchdown to interception ratio. Now, the reason that's a fact is he definitely pulled it down and did not throw those 50-50 balls later in the year. It was very important to him to protect the football. That skewed the ratio a little bit, but you're still talking about every other quarterback picked number 1 overall since, the 60s. He has the best touchdown to interception ratio. Put a line in front of that guy, I feel pretty good about that. Add some more rushing attack, I feel pretty good about that. So there are things to feel good about. One of the things to not feel good about was the defensive line this year. Montez Sweat, I don't want to say regressed because I don't feel like he really did, but he didn't get a lot of help, especially after Billings went out. Javon Dexter developed pretty nicely for a little bit. And then it really tailed off. And Wesley Song says, how do you want the Bears to go about beefing up their defensive line? Our run defense and lack of pressure was very noticeable for a lot of the season. Yes, especially the second half of the season. And the good news, Wesley, is there is help coming in this draft. I don't really care if you want interior pressure or if you want edge pressure or if you just really want run stoppers. There are guys in this draft and lots of them. So you're not necessarily going to have to go and spend your highest pick on them. Now, if you choose to, there are some really good names and they are going to go off the board quickly, but because there are so many of them, they're not going to run out. It's not like offensive tackle is certain years, maybe even this year, where after the top 3 or 4 guys, if you're looking for a guy to start, you're reaching or you really believe your coach can develop them. Not so in terms of defensive tackle this year. Just some of the names: Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. So Graham and Grant, both from Michigan. Keep that straight. Deone Walker from Kentucky is amazing. There are very few people built like him on the planet that can move like him. Howard Cross III, Howard Cross's son, coming out of Notre Dame. Michael Williams from Georgia, Shamar Turner from Texas A&M, Alfred Collins from Texas. Yes, Texas has another good, beefy defensive tackle. Talik Williams from Ohio State. One of my favorite names in the draft, Dante Corleone from Cincinnati. Tonka. We have a Tonka. We have a defensive lineman named Tonka. For me, that's an auto draft. Yeah. Tonka Hemingway, like you got to go get a guy named Tonka that plays defensive tackle. Cam Jackson from Florida is very good. CJ West from Indiana is going to get a lot of looks. I'm going to get to see him live at the Shrine Bowl at the end of the month. I'm excited about that. Eric Gregory, Zeke Biggers, like there's a bunch of guys in this draft. You're not going to run out. Those are just the defensive tackles. We didn't even really go into the edges. There are a lot of edges. You're going to hear a lot about Abdul Carter and a ton of other edge rushers. So wherever the Bears choose to upgrade their defensive line, they're going to have a lot of choices in this draft, and they can pick them sort of up and down the board because of that depth. It's not like, well, we have to use our first round pick to improve our defensive line, because if we don't, by the time we get around to it, all those players are going to be gone. With just the players I named, you can't pick them all before you have your second round pick or your third round pick. So it'll be interesting to see how they choose to. I agree. They do need to upgrade the defensive line. It was very noticeable down the stretch that they could not create pressure. They did an admirable job stopping the run, but they were nowhere near as good as they were at the end of last season, stopping the run, in which they were pretty much the top team in the league for the last 6 or 8 games, stopping the run last year. So they need help. Help is available. That's good. And then some of those guys, if you're just looking for run stuffers, if you really think you need to replace guys like Billings because of the injury history or age or anything else, those guys are available typically in the 4th or 5th. One-dimensional run stuffers that are just very hard to move off their spot. You can get those guys year after year in the 4th and 5th rounds. And you need to, but they're available and they will be this year. And you might get, that flash in the pan that's a little bit better than that, just got forced down the board because there's so much talent in this defensive line class that people just forget about them, or they had a different grade on them, or whatever else. This is a potential year where you could pick a guy in the 4th round. He could work his way into a starter by the second half of his rookie season and turn out to be a really solid player for you. That's not the case every year. It is the case this year.
Yeah, 100%. Like you mentioned a bunch of guys there. Like there's even other names that kind of from the early kind of looking, and kind of Walter Nolan from an Ole Miss is an interesting name when you want to. I always look at this as who would pair well with Javon, because to a point, Billings, really good player. But again, we mentioned it last year. You don't want these guys playing every snap. You need a good rotation in the middle.
And it's like hockey these days.
Yeah.
Growing up playing hockey, like you have lines, right? And they're complete lines. And when a line comes off, the whole front of the line comes off, all 3 players together, 3 more players go on. And you have 3 lines at least that play in regular rotation. And for years and years, defensive line stayed on the field and offensive line stayed on the field. Now, offensive line, I understand. Defensive line, to a point, I understand. But these are big bodies, and they are in contact, heavy contact, every snap. Like it is a tough physical position to play. And you're talking about huge guys playing at max effort, and nobody can do that for, 65 to 80 snaps at peak efficiency. You need some breaks, and you can't have a huge letdown. And that was the thing, is teams invested heavily in the starters. They just kept the starters out there. And then at the end of the season, they'd look down and be like, man, this guy got 850 snaps this year. And yeah, he wore down because he's 335 pounds. And yeah, he was not effective in the last quarter, certainly not as effective in the last quarter of the year as he was in the first quarter. And now it's waves. You will see it. It started in college, and it's one of those, I don't want to say improvements. It's one of those trends from college that it started really in scouting for me a couple of years ago, that when one guy left, like the entire line would leave. It wasn't like, oh, give the big guy a breather. It's like the defensive tackle rotation, fresh 2 defensive tackles every other series, every 2 series, whatever it is. And the whole line would rotate out. And I thought, this is starting to look like hockey, where the entire front of the defense goes off. And if these ends are in, they leave them in with these defensive tackles because they know how to run their stunts together. And then when those guys get tired, 4 more fresh ones come in, or 3 fresh ones come in, and you leave your star edge rusher on the field because you want him, there in late downs. But the NFL is starting to be the same way. They don't want guys getting to the end of the year, especially big guys, and having, 900 snaps under their belt. It's just too many. So that means you need a good rotation. And we're seeing it all over the league. We're seeing, players that are less heralded, developing roles for themselves. Desjuan Johnson got a sack last night for the Rams. This guy we interviewed at the Shrine Bowl from Toledo. Good young player, great front four in front of him. And, Shula's still finding a way to rotate him in because they want to keep him fresh. They want to get that guy experience, and he's a good player. So we're seeing it all over the league. The Bears, if they're going to take that approach, need a lot more help, not a little more help. But just to get the frontline starters, they need probably 2 additions, another edge and another defensive tackle to go with what they've got. And then you need some of those really good quality rotational players that you draft lower or pick up as undrafted free agents and develop. And they turn into guys that can go out and eat 250, 350 snaps for you a year on a rotational basis and really fill in and be counted on to complete their role.
Yeah, and what I like about the defensive line this year, if you talk about the edge rushers, there's impact players at kind of like different styles of edge rushers. Like we always see, like kind of you have the bigger, longer guys, the kind of twitchy, kind of get around the offensive tackle type. There's a lot of difference of opinion that's going to happen here with this class because there's a lot of high impact guys. You mentioned Abdul Carter, who's he's going to distance himself, I think, from a lot of these guys just from his performances recently. But then you can look at it, whether it be in the end of the first round into the second round, you're going to see a bunch of edge rushers that people are going to know because you're going to see them. You would have seen them in very important college football games. And again, when you look at what they've been able to do, a lot of these GMs are going to be like, what style of defensive end do we want to bring in here? The Bears are going to look at this as who do we want to pair with Montez Sweat? Who do we want to have come in that's going to make that impact? Like, for Bears fans that love Abdul Carter, I'm sorry, you're not getting him at 10. So that's just not going to happen. Or we spoke about kind of Mason Graham, unless there's craziness that happens in front of them. Like those guys are not going to get down to where the Bears are picking. But that does not mean you can't get a very high impact player at those positions. If, like, let's say the guys they like on the offensive line go before them and some of the defensive linemen do fall down, there's some very high impact guys in positions the Bears badly need to upgrade. And I do think that's going to be an important element there, that to a point, the positions that the Bears badly need to fix this year, there's options to get better at those. Like, it's not like you're coming into a draft where we badly need an offensive tackle, or we badly need a defensive tackle, and it's slim pickings, because there are some positions this year where there's some slim pickings. If you're looking for a quarterback, I'd be a tiny bit concerned when you compare kind of some of the receiver classes from previous years to this one. Like, there's some guys that I do like that have recently declared, but still not to the level of when we spoke about the receiving class last year, where you're talking about multiple guys in that first round that should be high impact players. You're not seeing that this year. I do like I know there was a question in the chat about the tight ends. I do think that could be an interesting one this year. Yeah. I actually like the tight end class more than the receiver class this year. Yep. So that's one where, and the Bears do need to add somebody there because they're not getting enough production at that position, and they need to, if they want to have a modern day offense. Of all these guys that we've been linked to as head coaches like to use their tight ends, and we need to be able to do that. Cole Kmet's been fine, but fine doesn't win you football games. You need to be able to be much better. And again, there's an opportunity here that the Bears have multiple picks. There's an avenue of where they might get more if if Ian Cunningham does get taken over by the Tennessee Titans job. I know he was runner up last time. He's in that kind of second stage of interviews there. He has a good chance. I hope he gets it because he deserves a chance, because I know people will say he's with the Bears. The Bears didn't win many football games. I think we're in agreement here. He's one of the high profile guys that deserves to be a GM in the league. And I do hope he gets it. Not just for the Bears getting extra draft capital, but I actually think he's going to be a very good GM. And he's one of those guys that when you look at some of these candidates, he's one of the good ones in terms of as a person, but also as somebody that is ready for that move. And hopefully he gets it.
I hope he gets it for all the reasons you say. I hope they turn him down because he has been the brakes on some of Ryan Poles' wild hair schemes. And if he leaves, I do worry that level of control,
safety blanket,
will be lost. And that's not a good thing. And that's credit to Ian. It's a knock on Poles. And, again, Ian deserves the chance. That's the most important thing. I think is going to do very well if he ends up as GM. I would be sorry to lose him. In fact, I would have liked, and this is completely impossible, for the Bears to move on from Ryan Poles and keep Ian. Now, the optics of that would not have been possible. I understand that, but do I think that would be a better net positive result? I think it might be, and that's saying something. So, again, hope he gets his opportunity. He's done really good work. He's worked his way up and he deserves it. Seeing a lot of chats about offensive line and defensive line. And, DB says, yeah, this year's class draft feels pretty light offensively. I think in any draft, you have to look for where the strengths are. It's an incredibly strong running back class. The tight end class is really exciting. And just at a time when we're seeing a bunch of offenses in the league go back to multi-tight end sets, a bunch of 3 tight end sets for the Rams last night. It is an opportunity to take advantage of basically a market correction where wide receivers get paid so much and there's so much just, I would say, institutional focus on them, that you can go get a tight end, pay them less, and have them produce just as much. In the case of Brock Bowers and, look, Kelsey in his heyday, not this year, Laporta last year in his rookie year, you can get as much production. Trey McBride is another one. Like, you can get as much production out of a tight end as you can get out of a wide receiver, but you pay them a lot less because of the NFL pay scale. So, smart team builders are like, hey, if we go get 3 really good tight ends, a blocking one and 2 that catch passes, look at what Isaiah Likely does for the Ravens. Like, teams are catching on that you can draft one of those guys in the middle rounds. Doesn't have to be a complete player, can be a good route runner, a tough physical catcher over the middle, even, athletic outside the numbers. A bunch of them are. This is a very good class for that. Running back class is extremely deep. You can go get a running back in the 4th round that's going to take meaningful snaps for you this year. Maybe he's not going to be your lead back. Maybe he is, but those types of players are available. Typically, I think when there's not a dearth of quarterbacks, and there's not a ton of offensive tackles, people go, oh, it's a weak class offensively. Or if after 2 to 3 sort of historic wide receiver classes in a row, it's a little bit worse off, which it is this year. It's not bad. People go, oh, there's no offense. It's like, well, there's offense. It's just in different places. The running back spot, interior line is okay. It's taking some shots from some injuries and some players returning. Offensive tackle is not as deep as it was last year. So again, those all feel like downs, but tight end is up, running back is up. I would say interior offensive line is just as good in a lot of ways. Maybe not the high profile players, but a lot of good players who are going to contribute. So it's there. You just have to pick around, and it's not necessarily the flashy pieces. And it's the same on defense. Some years there's no pass rushers and there's 6 corners over 6'3". And some years you can't find a good cover man corner that tackles to save your life, and you've got edge rushers coming out the wazoo. So it's just, you have to go for the relative strength of the draft class. That's the year you have the picks, and you have to decide how to spend them and get the best value for them and really build your team and balance that out with free agency. And that's the art of team building. So,
yeah. And I think the draft in the way it's fallen for the Bears this year is actually pretty good from what you want to improve on. You want to improve within the trenches. We said we need to improve in the running game. To a point, you added the receivers last year. Can you add somebody and maybe take a shot on a guy that can be your third or fourth receiver potentially? But then you look at the running backs, and we've mentioned it. You need to add guys in there. Like, I love Roshan Johnson. He was the guy that I wanted the Bears to draft in that year. But we know what his injury concerns have been. He's had multiple concussions now, and it's a tough situation for him. Once his rookie deal is up, he's probably not going to get extended from the Bears. You look at DeAndre Swift. We mentioned it before. When he's in space, it's cool and he's athletic and all that, but I don't like the vision that he has because he doesn't hit the hole properly. And to a point, it can be the offensive line and not creating those gaps for him, but also he has to take a little bit of the onus on himself. When you look at the running backs that are coming in this draft, obviously everybody talks about Ashton Janty, but there's so many other options. The one I'll be looking at is the two guys from Ohio State, where you look at Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Where are those guys going to go? Who's going to go first? Because I think they're going to go in similar enough areas because it just depends on what you're looking for.
Yep.
Henderson could be that guy that everybody's talking about, kind of some of the other names, and he's just so dynamic that, like, I thought he was going to come out last year, and he's that dynamic and could be a really good option. Like, let's just say the Bears do go, let's say, offensive line in at 10. They don't move down in the second round pick and they select, I don't know, like an edge rusher, and they're happy enough there. And then suddenly you still have a Travion Henderson that's available, or somebody that falls that's a running back. And because of the position, you're like, this guy is way better than this draft selection. I'm fine. I'm never usually a huge advocate for taking running backs particularly early.
Yep.
But because I'm always like, build the offensive line and it's fine. But if you get to a point of where you've added important players on the defensive line, offensive line, and you see a guy there that you just have that's rated way higher, I'm okay with it because I saw what happened to the rushing attack last year and I need that to be fixed. But I'm more of someone that I think you can find somebody in like a fourth round, especially in a draft class like this, that, as you said, can really make a difference. I think so many people spoke about Bucky Irving last year before he came into the NFL. I think he was kind of one of the hot names for, one of the hot names to kind of going into that draft class. And it didn't surprise me in the slightest the season that he had. And there's guys that are going to be like him this year that you're going to be able to find, you're going to be able to add. And I think that there are certain positions for the Bears that they badly need to fix. And luckily enough, some of those positions are relatively deep this year to where you have a decent amount of draft picks. I think right now they have 8 picks coming into this draft. It's better than previous years. I can tell you that much.
No, for sure. And let me clear my throat to talk about running backs, one of my favorite positions to scout in the NFL. But first, I want to answer a question from a longtime supporter of my work and work for a lot of Bears creators, Andrew Fitzpatrick. Welcome back, Fitzy. Any example of Ian putting the brakes on outside of the Rome trade up? Hell yeah, brother. There is tape of him talking Ryan Poles down from trading up for the punter. No kidding. Ryan Poles was going to spend a pick to trade up for Tory Taylor. If you thought the 4th round pick was bad enough, many of us did. There is tape of Ian walking up to him going, hey, whoa. Like, if you want to take him, but don't spend another pick to do it. And Ryan's like, weapon, and he's like, no. Take him. Do not spend a pick to do it. So that's the kind of safety net that I am looking at holding on to, hopefully. If Ian does not get a job again, all props to Ian, believe he deserves a job. And if he gets one, good for him. The Bears will have to solve their own problems without their seatbelt. In terms of running back, Great class for running backs. Obviously, Genty is going to dominate the headlines, but you've got Ollie Gordon the second, who's an Oklahoma State guy who was in the running for the Heisman last year. You got Quinshon Judkins, who was Ole Miss and then Ohio State. You got Omarion Hampton, who is one of my absolute favorites in this class from last year at UNC. Love the way he runs. Jaden Ott from California is going to be a name you're going to hear. Damian Martinez from Miami is a guy that's going to be available down the board who has a lot of juice and, again, is going to be overlooked just because of the numbers. Devin Neal from Kansas. Woodius, I think it's Quintavious Marks. Quintavious Woody Marks from USC had a very good year. Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech. Marcus Yarns is from Delaware. He recently got the call up to go to the Senior Bowl. He's going to be there. And then way down the board, possibly even undrafted, but I don't think so because he's way too good a player. Len Larison from UC Davis. Go look it up. He had, I think, 3 games where he had 100 yards rushing and 100 yards receiving this season. So absolute weapon, gonna be a lower round draft pick, but a super fun player. Caleb Johnson from Iowa is a player that a ton of Bears fans are going to end up talking about, and rightfully so. If you go get that guy in the middle rounds and he's your, RB2 or RB3, like, he's going to be productive. So lots and lots and lots of choices. That's not even all of them. The Bears have a very good chance to restock the running back room in the draft using lower round draft picks, and they should do it because it's rare that this much talent comes around. I know all the Bears fans are going to say Genty. I'm not opposed. Genty is a tremendously gifted player. He is so good. He could be franchise changing in the way that top backs are. The ones you invest very rarely in. Is he worth a top 10 pick even with that? Probably not, just because of the wear and tear of the position. Is that any knock on his ability? No, he is amazing. You will see plenty of tape of him if you haven't already. But don't fear that if the Bears don't get Genty for some reason, that they're not getting any running back help in this draft. They could have multiple other picks down the board that could be very, very productive. So it's a good draft class for that. It lines up fairly well with the Bears' needs. Outside of, if you truly believe the Bears need offensive tackle to move forward, some people do, some people don't. That is starting offensive tackle, not backup offensive tackle. You're going to have to overpay in this draft because there are only a few, and they're going to go very quickly, as they always do when there's less. But interior offensive line, we talked about, interior and exterior defensive line, both available in large numbers in this draft. Pretty good corners, but again, the Bears are pretty well set at corner. Safety, there's some fun players, but I think the Bears are going to have to be selective. Wouldn't spend a particularly high pick on a safety, but the Bears have a very large need at safety, quite frankly. Tight end, they can use more help there. Again, they don't need to necessarily pick a starter, but they've got to pick somebody that can threaten the seam in a different way than Cole Kmet. And this draft has all of that. So again, this is the alchemy of the NFL draft. You need to balance all these picks and your free agency dollars and your available cap space and get what you need and not overpay to do it. And if you do that, it's out there. Like some years we just look at it and go, well, the Bears need a quarterback, and there's not a quarterback. So you're just kind of out of luck. That's not this year necessarily for the Bears. They got their quarterback in the right year. They got their top wide receiver in the right year. And now they can continue to build this team so that Caleb, A, doesn't get killed, and B, has weapons that work out, and a defense that makes it so he doesn't have to win a boat race every week. So we'll see how it works, but it's out there if they want to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a key. There was a poll that I think Mike put in there. Which would you invest on first? O-line got 89% to the D-line 10%. And I do want to...
It's both.
Yeah. It's both. But it's an interesting one, right? Like, let's say kind of craziness ensues and teams do kind of go up there and they're... I know we expect 2 quarterbacks to go pretty high. I personally wouldn't be doing that, but just based on kind of the positions and stuff. Like, let's say if it was when it came down to 10 or when the Bears were selecting, and they had one of their top defensive linemen versus one of their top offensive linemen, where would you want the Bears to go in that situation? Would you put or would you put kind of more weight on offensive line because we need to make sure that Caleb is protected, or we saw what happened with the lack of pass rush for this defense? Which one do you think it would be a more important one if, like, let's say you had the two players rated very similar?
Yeah, I think offensive line's probably going to have the higher impact. Again, they're going to rotate less and you have less there. It's it's debatable, but in terms of the way the offensive line that you have assembled, if you're Ryan Poles, has performed, not how they were rated, not how you thought they were going to perform, not what you thought they were worth, how they've actually played on the field. And this sort of bleeds into a bigger discussion that we won't probably have tonight about how much blame does Chris Morgan, like how much blame gets laid at the feet of Chris Morgan, the offensive line coach? And my answer is a lot, because the young players did not look ready to play. The veteran players did not play well. It took a change at offensive coordinator to make them look even competent. They did look competent for a couple of weeks. We forget that. And then it fell apart again. So I think you're certainly moving on from your offensive line coach. And that's one of the most important hires for me on the entire team. And if the Bears are lucky enough to get Ben Johnson, which I don't necessarily think is going to happen, the possibility that Hank Fraley would come along with him as the offensive coordinator is very tantalizing. Fraley's done a tremendously good job developing young offensive linemen in Detroit. The Bears need somebody like that. It doesn't have to be Fraley. It could be Cromer. He's done the same in Buffalo. I don't know if there's that many Jeff Stoutland disciples. Like, we don't have the Jeff Stoutland tree yet, but if there's one of them out there hanging around that, I don't know, took an elevator ride with Jeff Stoutland at one point, kind of like guys that used to get close to McVay would get offensive coordinator jobs in a heartbeat. Like, the Bears need somebody to develop young offensive linemen and get the offensive line to play cohesively. So the need is just so much greater on offensive line, because honestly, you could make a case for replacing 4 of the 5 starters, which is ridiculous. Now, it could be as few as 2, but that would be Braxton coming back to health and playing at a mid-level at left tackle, which is a very valuable asset. Darnell Wright returning to the form we saw at the end of his rookie year, which was a powerful guy, just ragdolling defensive ends. He was not there last year. And then, kind of hiding Shelton in the middle between 2 very good guards that you acquired between free agency and the draft. Like, that could work with a good offensive line coach. That could absolutely work. That would be the bare minimum of investment, is 2 new starters. The maximum would be a new offensive line coach and 4 new starters, which is a lot. But you could make a very strong case that nobody outside of Darnell Wright should be retained on the offensive line for, mistakes made this year. Now, again, depends on how much you believe rests on coaching and a lot of other things. Poor offensive design doesn't help, but there were so many mistakes and inconsistencies this year that I would lean more towards restocking that, because you can't get caught out. We saw what happened a couple of years ago with injuries. We've seen what happened for the last 3 years with inconsistency. It's just destroyed the offense. There's do not pass go, do not collect $200. So defensive line is tantalizing, especially in this draft. But if it was kind of like you said, players you had rated very similarly, and you believe that was the need, it would look, if you're talking about their first pick, it's almost certainly going to be a tackle. If you believe that tackle is going to come in and Braxton's going to be your swing, that's not a bad situation. You'd have to believe in that very strongly. But if that's the case and you believe you want to have 2 stalwart tackles and go from there, look, I mean, that's what Joe Brady's working with in Buffalo, right? Deion Dawkins has been one of, if not the best left tackles in football, and Spencer Brown has developed magnificently at right tackle. A lot of people aren't talking about that. Yeah, there you go. So get that set, because if you don't get that set, all bets are off. And then, pivot very quickly in the second round of the defensive line, because it too is important.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, a lot of this is going to depend on kind of who does take over as head coach, right? Like we spoke about it, that if you have a guy, if you do end up with a Ben Johnson, you guys like Kevin Ziegler who are free agents this year, that wouldn't be the big names, but have been reliable along that Detroit offensive line. Like let's say maybe it's not him and maybe it's Monken comes in. Well, their left tackle and Ronnie Stanley is a free agent this year. And normally you'd be like, oh, the Ravens should extend him, but the Ravens typically don't extend a lot of their free agents. So there is a potential that someone like that hits. Obviously, the ideal scenario we've spoken about before is if by some grace of God that Trey Smith actually gets the free agency and wants to come to Chicago. That's like your ideal scenario. But there's other guys that are out there that you can bring in, and especially when you look at the interior, like look at what the Eagles have been able to do with Mekhi Becton, right? Like everybody thought that he was just going to be a failed draft pick from the New York Jets. They move him on the inside, give him that experience, and he looks really good. And maybe that's a guy that you look at as kind of that mid-tier guy that you bring in as an interior player that maybe replaces a Tevin Jenkins who's probably going to go, right? Like I'm fine with a Coleman Shelton getting like coming in again on a 1-year deal, but
Fine is doing a lot of work there, Ciaran.
I like if you're bringing in somebody else to compete with him and he's not just getting the job, or maybe you draft a rookie to come in that your expectation is within a month of the season can be your starter. Like I'm okay with that because there's a lot worse out there. Like people assume that Coleman Shelton is the worst center in football.
No,
you need to look at some, like I hear this all the time where it's like certain player is like so bad and that all these other offensive lines are like more than half the league have garbage offensive lines. Like that's the reality is the thing. What we see the most and what people will see the most now is most of these good playoff teams have good offensive lines. So that's the reason they get to that point. And it's not like you can just build it straight away. Like I look at this Detroit offensive line that was built over a 5-year period. Mm-hmm. Really, it was not just they drafted Penei Sewell, they added this player, they got Taylor Decker. Like this was a long time coming for Detroit, and they built it time and time again. Like that's where the Bears are going to have to hit on their main targets on the offensive line, but then they're going to have to get veterans that are not going to be the 10 to 12 million range. You're going to have to get a guy that's going to be averaging like 3.5 to 4 million. That needs to be an above average starter. And that's where the Bears are really going to see if they can make their money here, because you need to find a guy that can fit whatever system kind of comes in, whoever the coach is, that you can bring a guy in that people might not get excited about when he's the signing or he's one of the signings, but he comes in and he fits it. Like I doubt the Eagles fans were really excited about Mekhi Becton coming in because they saw what he did with the New York Jets. But
yeah, but anybody that goes to work with Jeff is like,
I was just gonna say that. I was like, yep. If you get a guy that has come from that system and has worked with him, I feel pretty good that they can at least improve what we have seen here. Yep. But and that's where you have to look at, is there a guy didn't work on the outside but has the athleticism, has the body type, and has kind of being a mean SOB that can do it on the inside? That's what the Bears are going to have to look for, because they need to get tougher on the inside. They have too many offensive linemen that are too nice. You need guys that would prefer to be that kind of, as we like to say, kind of like they give no crap. Like they just go for it. And that's where I think the Bears have made a mistake. We've seen over the last couple of years that they're not really going for those mean guys. It's all technique and it's nothing to do with kind of aggressiveness. And you see that with the mentality of the offensive line quite often. And the one thing I will ask for Ryan Poles, please, to not do, please stop signing and drafting injured offensive linemen. Just please, for 1 year, stop doing that. That would help.
I don't know that he will, but people said it even earlier in the chat tonight, like maybe that's a move for Ciaran, right? Maybe Ciaran Amagaji ends up on the inside. He has physical potential to play there. It's not an easy transition for a lot of guys. Some guys make it look easy. Talking to offensive linemen and learning about how they think and how they tick and what's easy for them. One of the questions I always ask him is, does it matter to you if you play on the left side or the right side? And some guys are absolutely adamant, hey, I'd be trash on the other side. And I ask the same question outside and inside. Is the guard tackle, or if you're, either way, if you're a guard, do you think you play tackle? We've seen it with Joe Tunney this year in Kansas City, or if, vice versa. If you're a tackle, do you think you could kick inside and play guard if you needed to? And some guys are absolutely yes. And some guys, it doesn't matter at all. And if you find a guy that it doesn't matter for side or position, you get Elton Jenkins, which is incredibly valuable. And they're really rare. Zach Tom's another guy. He played tackle in college. He's playing center, like super, super valuable player that says, hey, I can play on either side and I can play inside or outside. Doesn't matter. And then I guess the cherry on top is, can you snap? But a lot of guys will be like, hey, I can play on the right side. I can play guard or tackle, but I have to stay on the right side. Some guys are like, I could play right or left, but I have to stay playing tackle. I couldn't play guard. It's not for me. And then you get those very rare players who are like, I don't care, left or right, inside, outside, I'm good to go. And they're very, very valuable on a small roster in the NFL. It's not college. You don't have, 85 spots that suit up on a Saturday. So we'll see what happens, but we are getting down towards the end of our time. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I do want to let everybody know what our plans are going forward because, again, this is our first year, and we planned this out to be weekly every week during the season up until right now. So what comes next? We're going to try and get you either a live stream like this or a podcast. We haven't quite decided yet, at least once a month in the off season. And we're going to try and time them to coincide with big things so that we're not just making content to make content, because that doesn't appeal to any of us. And I don't think it really appeals to any of you either. So as the coaching search concludes, we'll have a podcast or a live stream about it. As free agency gets rolling or is in wave 2 or wave 3, and we know some things about what the Bears are doing or what they've prioritized, we'll have a podcast or a live stream about it. We will have draft previews. I am heading out at the end of this month on the scouting trail, heading to the Shrine Bowl at the end of this month. I think I'm home for 4 days. Then I'm going to the Super Bowl, doing some media there. Then I'm home for like 10 days. Then I'm back in Indy for the combine. We're going to be back on the field again this year. And then I'll do a few pro days. I'll probably do the Washington pro day and the Oregon pro day, but I don't think I'm going to do as many pro days as I did last year. I think I did 5 last year, and that was a little too many. I do need to spend some time in front of these monitors watching all these draft candidates. So that's the way we're going to go for pretty much the entire off season. We will probably take about a 6-week break when the NFL takes a 6-week break after rookie minicamp, right after the draft, before, hardcore OTAs and training camp kickoff. But we will come to you when there is news. We will try and keep you informed. We are going to push on towards 1,000 subscribers. We're really close. When we do that, YouTube gives us some more freedom to run these live streams a little bit differently, have some more fun. We're excited about that and what we can bring to you when that happens. So tell your friends, if they're Bears fans and they're not checking us out, to click the subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything and certainly helps us out, helps us get seen by more people. In the meantime, that's probably it. You can always reach all of us on social media. I'm on both X and Blue Sky. The pod's on X. You can, hit the comments here, of course. Let us know what you want to see, what you want to talk about, what you want us to be looking for, what you want me to be looking for while I'm on the road scouting all these players. Happy to give updates on all that stuff, but we are going to reduce the cadence a little bit here so that we can concentrate on actually doing some drafting and not, putting up, no offense, Mike, meaningless polls every week just to fill air. We don't like doing that. We don't like watching that or reading that or consuming that. So that's not the podcast or the live stream that we want to make. So let us know what you think of that approach. It is new. Again, we're going to work our way through the first year and learn some things. And hopefully all of you will continue to follow along, because it has been very gratifying to see the growth every week, week over week, based on all of you showing up, interacting, leaving comments, leaving likes, recommending the pod to friends, all that stuff helps. We've seen it all. We appreciate it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to a point of, let us know who you would like to see us get on the podcast as well, because
Absolutely.
again, because we want to bring people that are on the podcast that you like to listen to, that you would like to engage in, because like there'll be times that will obviously the majority of the time it's on our podcast pre-recorded, all that sort of stuff, but there could be times where it might suit to where we can get somebody on and it's a bit live and you can ask questions and stuff like that. We're open to all these ideas because we want to provide the content that you guys want to listen to. And as EJ said, kind of, we will be here if there's big news to happen. So obviously when the Bears do hire their head coach, whoever that may be, we will do a live stream. We will not do it straight away once they do it, because we will go through every inch of that coach to make sure that we get who could be the potential coordinators. What are they going to bring to the Bears? We will bring a full in-depth analysis of when they do hire that coach, so that you guys have all the information there for you. Same thing when it comes to free agents. Like, instead of just doing it as wave one where there'll be all the reactions, we will go on when we hear of these different signings. What will they bring? Why is it a good move? Why is it potentially not a good move? And then obviously with the draft, EJ works his ass off on a lot of that sort of stuff. And again, we will have draft shows to where we will answer your questions, but also go through some of these positions that the Bears are going to be interested in and where it's going to fit, to see where it will fit the Bears and why we think that these guys are certain good candidates. Like we did a show towards the end of the draft process last year, and I think we mentioned a couple of potential guys that the Bears could bring in. One of those guys happened to be an edge rusher that they traded up for. So like things like that, we would prefer to be able to do all these shows to where we give you guys, one, answer your questions, especially when it comes around to draft time, but provide the analysis that you guys want to hear and players you want us to talk about. And so if you start seeing our draft stuff that comes up and there's a player or a group of players you want us to talk about, don't be afraid to put it in the comments, because we do look at the comments. We will then kind of cater our videos and our live streams to that, to where we can get you the answers to the questions that you do have about this team.
Yep. And as Ciaran said, we will continue to do that in a bunch of different ways here. And if you're not following us on all the social feeds, please do that as well. And we're just going to try and make things that are interesting to us that we think are also interesting to you, because we believe that Venn diagram is very close to a circle as Bears fans. If we care about it, you probably care about it as well. If we miss, let us know. If we're hitting it, let us know as well. Don't just assume that if you don't say anything, we think you like it, because we love to hear it both ways. And it's been a lot of fun. Huge thanks to Mike working his butt off in the background as usual. We will continue that. And some of these live streams, we'll have him in front of the camera as well, because he has a lot of fun there. And we love having him. It's a great perspective. It's a nice mix. And, tell us what you want us to be doing next year. If you have ideas about, a meetup in Chicago, or you think it would be super fun to do some kind of live event, let us know. We're open to that. We don't really have a budget, but that doesn't mean we can't make it happen. There are certainly times in life where opportunities come up, and sometimes we're all just going to look at each other and go, man, we got to do this. Like, it's going to be way too much fun. And that's, this is very much based on the ethos of make cool shit with your friends. Yeah. And we'll keep doing that. And I think it's a pretty good North Star to follow. And so far, 800 plus of you think so too. So thanks very much to all of you. Thanks for all your questions and all your interaction during the season. Again, we're not going anywhere. We're just reducing the cadence a little bit so we can get some other work done. But let us know where we need to keep driving. Give us our North Star. And we will try and get you there as quickly and having as much fun as we can. So with that, I'm all set. Ciaran, you have anything else?
No, not really. Just again, for Bears fans, like, don't get too high, don't get too low when it comes to when it gets to whoever they hire. Again, we'll go through it. We'll kind of dissect the good points, the bad points. If they don't hire the coach that you guys want, again, that doesn't mean it's going to be bad. If they hire a guy that you do want doesn't mean it's going to be good. So let's just take it in our stride, and we'll go through this off season kind of as a community here and kind of build that forward, both from the draft, free agency, and hopefully we get to go through a week by week process next year in the 2025 season where we get to talk about way more wins than we did this year.
Yeah, it does make it a lot easier to talk about a team when they're having some success and not shooting themselves in the foot. Let's hope the Bears get closer to that, because it would be a lot more fun. With that, we will probably sign off. We will see you pretty soon. But again, thanks for all the support. We deeply appreciate it. If you want to support the podcast right now, because we're not monetized on YouTube, one of the best ways to do it is find one of the podcasts, click the link in the description or the QR code, head over to Homage. They've kept us looking good all year as our clothing sponsor. They are a great company. They're headquartered in Ohio. Their stuff is very, very soft and easy to wear. They have good looking Bear stuff. We don't have any Bear era merch there. Don't think that's coming anytime soon, but anything you buy using that link, whether it's Bears stuff, they have Great Lakes Brewing stuff, they have baseball stuff, hockey stuff, you name it. Anything you buy through Homage, we get a cut of it. Helps support the show. One of the best ways to support this particular podcast right now, and we deeply appreciate it. So we will talk to you all very soon. Again, big thanks to Mike for running it. Big thanks for all of you for showing up. And with that, we'll see you pretty shortly.